Hello everybody, how are you doing today? You may have noticed I've moved. It's because it's so bright and sunny today that oh, my hair looks so weird, like through the window. I thought I'd sit in front of the window today so that it might block out some of the light. I also dug out this furnace t-shirt that I made. Skulls! It's part of a workshop, I think, in schools or libraries. I thought I'd lost it. Anyway, so yeah, it feels a bit weird sitting here. I feel like I'm in the wrong place, but it's really, really hot today. I'm sorry I was so tired last night. I was so tired I didn't even know what was going on in our Dungeons and Dragons game. I play a Skald, which is kind of like a bard mixed with a barbarian. How cool is that? Called Ostog. And he has a pug called Dizzy. Dizzy cannot die. Or rather, he can die, but every time he dies, he comes back. Nobody knows why. And last night, I think my favourite thing about last night was that I went to the blacksmith and bought Dizzy, or ordered Dizzy some armour, some lightweight armour with a big helmet and horns, like big demon horns coming out of the helmet. So I thought that'd be quite cool. He'd quite like that. I love Dungeons and Dragons. I really do. I wish we could have a kind of roleplay version of this. How cool would that be? Something worth thinking about, I think. You go into the prison and you've got to try and survive inside the prison. Maybe I'll see what I can do. So yeah, anyway, I have moved. I'm in a slightly different place. It's all very discombobulating, but there we go. You'll just have to cope, as will I. So anyway, Alex, Z and Simon, they've been inside the cathedral, St. Martin's. They almost got killed by a bunch of basically geriatric worshippers in the cathedral. And they accidentally set fire to the cathedral in order to stop being burned alive. And they've just climbed onto the roof. And Alex is kind of looking out across the roof and he sees a city that's basically in flames. And through the flames, he sees a tower. And he knows that Alfred Furness is waiting for him in the tower. He keeps having this vision of a beast, this monstrous creature on top of the tower. Alfred Furness. And he's basically, he also knows that his house is over there somewhere, his old life. He has just said that instead, they're all talking about how to escape the city, and he's just said, you know what? I don't think I'm going to escape. I'm going to try and end this once and for all. So he's basically, I think, about to go and kick Furness's butt. I should have ironed my shirt, sorry. I feel really, not that I have an iron, but, I should have tried to do something. It's so weird because it's not been worn for years and years and years. I barely fit in it anymore. Anyway, enough from me. By the way, and there's lots of soldiers underneath them in Humvees and with machine guns trying to kill the rats that are taking over the city. Okay, are you sitting comfortably? You won't be soon. A rescue party. They started to argue with me, as I'd known they would, but their words were drowned out by the sudden thump of helicopter rotors, the thunder growing to an unnerving crescendo as two choppers broke past us, one on either side of the cathedral dome. We clutched our heads, the whirlwind threatening to spill us over the edge into oblivion. Lucy screamed, jumping back down onto the balcony and crouching against the curved wall, her face buried in her hands. The helicopter to our right dived earthwards. Its side door open and a machine gun mounted there. Manned by a soldier in camouflage, he swung it towards the cathedral, flames spouting from the barrel as he fired at something we couldn't see. The very stone of the building seemed to groan, heat shimmering from the tiles as if the fire that raged inside had brought this ancient Goliath of wood and stone to life. The other bird stayed high, another machine gun swivelling over the roofs of the surrounding buildings, a helmeted face visible in the dark interior. Z stood, waving his arms and calling for help. It was a bad idea, but I didn't have time to tell him that before the door gunner caught sight of us, sweeping the .50 caliber cannon our way and unleashing a torrent of lead. The balustrade to the right of us exploded into shrapnel, bullets puncturing the dome, bombarding us with chunks of stone. I toppled backwards, dragging Simon with me, the pair of us landing awkwardly on our backs. "Stop shooting!" Z yelled, holding his ground. After what felt like forever, but it'd probably be no more than a second. The gunner must have realised his mistake. The weapon fell silent, the chopper suddenly angling down towards the street. Z swore at it, hurling abuse at the soldier who'd tried to kill us. "We're on your side!" he called out. "Take us with you!" There was no way they could have heard him. I ran to the gap the shells had made, holding onto a fractured stone post and watching the two helicopters hover 20 metres or so over the plaza. They were both now shooting at the base of the cathedral, at the place where the truck had crashed, although we couldn't see what was going on. "Look out!" Z yelled. Something was moving along the roof of the cathedral beneath us, its feet scrambling for purchase, sending tiles flying in every direction. I recognised the baby face of the berserker as it blasted forwards on all fours, heading right for the choppers. It launched itself from the roof, hitting the first bird's tail and causing it to veer wildly to one side. The berserker's grip slipped, but it held on. It lashed out with one leg, catching the tail rotor and causing it to spin off, tearing a chunk from a shop. The chopper started to spin, the berserker clawing its way down the fuselage and swinging through the open door. The gunner fell, already in pieces, and the bird screamed up towards us, its blades clipping the cathedral dome metres from where we were standing. With a deafening crunch, the rotor came loose, the helicopter dropping fast. The berserker threw itself from the door, grabbing hold of a metal drainpipe on the cathedral wall, not even pausing for breath before bounding out of sight. Then the chopper landed on its side, its rotating blades catapulting it over the plaza and into the shops beyond, where it disappeared in a fireball. The second helicopter was rising, but it was too close to the cathedral. The berserker did exactly the same thing as before, launching itself through the thin air as the bird drew level with it. This time, however, the pilot knew exactly what to expect. The machine tilted at the last second, slicing up towards the airborne berserker. The creature flailed, desperately trying to change direction, but there was nothing it could do, hurtling into the rotors and exploding in a black mist. What was left of it sailed over the rooftops, impossibly far and impossibly graceful, falling out of sight streets away. A shower of black blood splattered the plaza below. "Result!" said Simon, who'd run to my side, his arm looped around my waist so he could lean over the balcony. He punched the air with his other hand. But the chopper had suffered too. I heard the whine of the engine, smoke pouring from the exhaust. It struggled, banking hard, one way, then tilting back towards the cathedral. Even from up here I could hear the consonant beep of the alarm as it began to spiral towards the street. The pilot managed to keep it steady, landing with a bump next to the corpses of the soldiers. The engine cut out, the growl growing quieter as the rotors slowed. "Come on!" yelled Z. He was clambering down onto a rusted iron ladder bolted into one of the huge columns that surrounded the dome. "This is our chance." "Our chance for what?" I asked, waiting for Lucy to follow before doing the same myself, telling myself I shouldn't look down, but unable not to. The sloped roof wasn't too far beneath us, though, and we reached it in under a minute. Z teetered to the edge, scanning the wall before jogging over to another ladder, wedged in the right angle of the building's cross. He vanished, Lucy next, Simon pushing in front of me with a mumbled, "Excuse me." I peered over, noting that we were about 2 stories from the ground, and decided to give the ladder a miss. I climbed over the vaulted wall, dropping effortlessly onto a ledge halfway between the roof and the plaza. Then I skipped off that and landed in time to greet Z at the bottom. He gave me a puzzled double take when he stepped off the ladder and turned around to see me waiting. "Take your time," I said, glancing at a watch I didn't have. "Show off," he replied, helping Lucy find the ground in a way that was a little more touchy-feely than it needed to be. Z. I gave him a knowing smile before she could turn around, and he scowled at me, his cheeks glowing. The northern arm of the cross-shaped cathedral was between us and the helicopter, but there was evidence of the battle everywhere. Across the street was the row of shops that had been decimated, the wreckage of the first chopper long lost beneath a blanket of flames. Heat hovered over the entire plaza, fierce enough to have made some of the trees here spontaneously combust, and everywhere there were splashes of black where the blood of the berserker had rained down, glistening in the firelight like spilled oil. I realised Z was off again, jogging around the stone wall of the cathedral. I caught up with him just as he was rounding the bend, seeing the helicopter resting on the sidewalk between the plaza and the street. It had crushed a bench and a bin, rocking unsteadily as its rotors slowed. The pilot was standing in the doorway, peering up at the engine, the rattle of which drowned out our approach until we were halfway across the plaza. As soon as he noticed us, the door gunner swiveled his machine gun our way, his finger on the trigger. "Hold it!" he yelled, startling the pilot. She clambered inside the chopper door, ripping her pistol from its holster. The four of us froze, but Z took one step closer, his hands raised. "We're human," he said, his choice of words making the situation feel even more surreal than it had before. "We're human, like you. Don't shoot." "On the ground," the pilot shouted. A young woman with cropped chestnut hair. "Spread your arms and legs. Do it now. I won't tell you twice." We did as she ordered, resting on the cold, damp stone as the pilot walked cautiously over and patted us down. She left me till last, prodding my swollen arm with her pistol. The barrel came away wet, a strand of clear fluid like saliva trailing between her weapon and my skin. Gross. I waited until she'd moved back before pulling my shredded sleeve down as far as it would go, suddenly ashamed. "You can all get up," she said, "except you." I didn't have to look to know she was talking about me. I watched as Z, Lucy and Simon all got to their feet, brushing themselves down. The pilot holstered her pistol, resting her hands on her hips, but the chopper gunner never took his sights off us. "Identify yourselves," the pilot demanded. Z Hatcher," Z replied. "This is Simon Rojo Flores and Alex Sawyer and Lucy..." "Oh, sorry, Lucy, I don't know your last name." "Wells," she said. "You have to help us. There are things out here. We've been attacked." "Yeah, you and everyone else in the city, sweetheart," the pilot said. She looked at me. "What's going on with that arm of yours? Looks infected. Looks a hell of a lot like one of those things to me." "I'm not infected," I replied, not knowing if I was lying or not. "I'm a good guy, honestly. I'm one of you." I didn't know if that was a lie either, but the pilot seemed to soften. Okay. I'm Annabelle Atilio, D Company, 1st Battalion, Home Defence. Why don't you kids tell me what you're doing out here?" No sooner had she spoken than a rally of screeches broke free from the constant roar of the fire, trailing down the street and echoing off the cathedral walls. The pilot stiffened, peering into the smoke that blocked off the route back into town. "Hold that thought," she said. "The chopper's nuked. Let's get some wheels and you can tell me when we're moving." Groundbound. Captain Atilio led the way to the truck we'd seen earlier. It was resting against the cathedral wall, surrounded by chipped stone and the remains of a rat it had squashed there. It looked like a Hummer, painted beige with metal plates bolted over the windows. There was a grey cloud rising from the hood, but it looked more like steam than smoke. "MATV," said Atilio, "designed to survive roadside bombs, so it should be okay." She pulled out her pistol again, holding it in one hand while she tried the door. It took a little work, but eventually it opened and the body of a soldier slid out. Atilio felt for a pulse in his neck, shaking her head. "Damn it, Roke, get over here and bring that fiddy. You lot, get in the back." We did as we were told, pulling open the rear door and climbing into the darkened interior. It was a bit of a squeeze with four of us on the seat, but we managed, peering through the porthole-like windows to see the gunner lugging his weapon over the plaza, a bronze tail of ammo sweeping the ground behind him. He clambered onto the roof turret and mounted the machine gun. "Hey guys," he shouted down, offering a smile to Lucy. "Don't mind me." "Right," said Atilio as she climbed into the driver's seat, firing up the engine. "Let's get this show on the road." She pulled the radio handset from its socket. "Checkmate 5, this is Airborne 32. Do you copy?" A voice buried deep within static whistled from the speakers. I couldn't make out what it said, but the captain obviously could. "Status is groundbound, sir," she reported. "Something pulled us right out the air. Airborne 14-2, now KIA. What do you need us to do?" The voice again, barking out orders made up of numbers and code words and not much else. "Roger that, XO," Atilio said. "Got some civvies. I'll drop them off with the PMCs over by Pear Street." She waited for confirmation, then replaced the receiver, slamming the gear stick into reverse and revving hard. The powerful engine pulled the truck from the wall, the vehicle bumping as it rolled over the rat. The gears groaned and she fought to find first, then started forwards across the plaza. "Where are we going?" I asked. "We need to head to Meriton," Lucy interrupted. "The police station. It'll be safe there." "Are you kidding me?" Atilio replied. "Meriton's gone. Everything up there is gone." "Gone?" Lucy asked. "What do you mean?" "I mean gone. Not there anymore. You haven't seen the fires?" Atilio eased the truck over the sidewalk and onto the street, accelerating towards the smoke. She saw us all nodding in the rearview mirror. "They took out the police stations first, hours ago. Meriton, Raymond Town, even as far north as Colette." "They?" I blurted, not quite believing what I was hearing. And even though I knew the answer, I added, "Who?" "We don't know," she said as the world turned to night, smoke nuzzling against the tiny windows, flowing in through the open roof. Above us the gunner coughed into his sleeve. Atilio flicked a switch and the headlights came on, doing little to cut through the confusion. "It all started with the prison break, but this is more than that. There are creatures out there, like animals, only not like any animal I've ever seen before. They're big, they're fast, they're savage, and they don't go down when you shoot them." I opened my mouth to try to explain, but for some reason Z rested a hand on my arm, offering a tiny shake of his head. Atilio angled the truck around a burning car. It was the one we'd passed earlier. She was driving us into the city. "We got the call around 0600, she went on. "Standby orders. By that time the hospitals were already filling up with cops and the emergency services had gone into meltdown. 1st Battalion stationed just outside the city. We're an anti-terrorist squad, really, ready to roll if something bad ever goes down." "Don't get much badder than this," the gunner added, swinging his machine gun around to cover the road ahead. "You can say that again," Atilio said. "Half an hour after that we got the green light. Move in. Our orders were to shoot on sight, clear the streets, and that was fine when we thought there were only prisoners to shoot." Z opened his mouth to protest, then obviously thought better of it. The smoke peeled away from the windshield to reveal that the road ahead had been completely blocked by what looked like a collapsed building. Bricks and tiles and furniture spilled everywhere and smouldering. Atilio swore, doing a clumsy three-point turn and heading back the way she'd come. "Keep it sharp up there, Roke," she ordered. "This feels wrong." "Yes, sir, ma'am," came his reply, muffled by the wind as the truck accelerated. Atilio hung a left at the first junction we came to, accelerating down the street before turning left again. The road here was narrower but clearer, and I could see right down it into the heart of the city. Above us there was a roar as another chopper soared over the streets, disappearing towards the distant skyscrapers. "Lucky bastards," muttered the captain. "I hate being ground-bound." "Excuse me," Lucy asked, leaning forward, "but where are we going? Shouldn't you be heading the other way, taking us to safety?" "Sorry, kid," Atilio said, her face in the mirror bearing a genuine expression of concern. "We've got our orders, and rescuing civvies ain't part of them. We're grateful that this is Sunday. Not too many people in the city, but it's spreading, and fast. We have had reports of disturbances as far out as the estuary, and if it gets any further, then we won't be able to stem it. Like a bleeder, you know, got to nip the artery or you're bang out of luck." "Then where are you taking us?" Lucy persisted, wiping the tears from her eyes. "Closest place I can think of as safe," Atilio replied. "Most of the bat is broken up and sweeping the city, and the police have been moved to the outskirts to prevent panic setting in. The ones that are still alive, that is. But we're not alone out here. Bunch of PMCs have been called in, and I know for a fact they're stationed down this way. Got a camp there, and I reckon that's your best bet." "PMCs?" I asked. "Private military companies," Atilio explained, the truck speeding up as it thundered down the hill. "Back in my training days, we'd have called them mercs, mercenaries, but we don't use that word anymore. They're soldiers, only they don't work for the government. Oh boy, hold on." I glanced out of the window to see that we were approaching a junction. There was less smoke here, and I could make out a cafe on the corner, and next to that, a grocery shop. It would have looked like a perfectly normal city scene if not for the two tanks that wheeled noisily from the street to our left, the tarmac crumbling beneath their squeaking caterpillar tracks. Atilio honked her horn and manoeuvred the truck between them, offering a salute out the window. If anybody inside saw her, they didn't show any sign of it, the enormous machines rolling out of sight behind a kebab shop. "This city is going to be dust before the day is out," she said once the thunder had passed. "So anyway, what exactly were you kids doing on the roof of St. Martin's in the first place?" "Hiding," Z said. "We were out on the streets, saw what was going on, looked like the best place to take shelter." And you just happened to be in the middle of the financial district at dark on a Sunday morning, she asked, although I could tell by the way she looked at us in the mirror that she already knew the truth. Would you believe that we were sightseeing? Z tried, not very convincingly. Captain Atilio nodded. Yeah, right. And this here is the Queen's carriage, and Roke up there is her footman. You a footman, Roke? If I am, I'm wearing the wrong uniform, he shouted down. And you lot aren't tourists either, she said. I've seen enough prison eyes in my time. Don't look so worried. A few escaped juvies are the least of my concerns at the moment. Right now, the more of you lot we see who aren't punching through solid steel and biting off heads, the better. She turned in her seat, glancing at my arm. Though the brains will want to take a good look at you with that tree trunk you've got there. The brains, I asked, and for some reason found myself thinking of the Weezers and their wicked blades. Don't worry about it, Atilio said. Military intelligence has set up shop a dozen clicks away. I can't take you there. We'll drop you with the mercs for now, and it's back into the fight. So you have no idea what's going on? Z asked, leaning between the seats. Atilio shook her head and let out a rueful laugh. Kid, I haven't got a clue. All I know is that there are things out there that make Al-Qaeda look like fluffy bunnies, and we've got orders to shoot them dead. Until someone tells me different, I pull the trigger first and ask questions never. Welcome to life on the front line. I don't know if she said any more, because it suddenly felt as if the sky above me had opened up, a noise like the world ending. I didn't know what it was until a shell casing landed on my lap, bigger than my thumb and red hot. I brushed it off, feeling more drop down, a rain of burning brass as Roke fired the cannon. I clamped my hands to my ears, feeling the truck veer wildly to the right, something bouncing off the bumper with a dull thud. Above me, Roke swung the weapon around, shooting it back the way we'd come. You see that? He yelled as Atilio steadied the vehicle. Man, it was bigger than a horse. You get it? The captain yelled. Hit it with about a dozen rounds, Roke replied. Just threw itself over a roof. I think it's still up there. He grunted in frustration, pulling the trigger again. I looked out the back, saw the enormous shells punching through random walls, tearing chunks from the brickwork, smashing windows into dust. Then he stopped, spitting out a couple of choice swear words. It's getting worse, Atilio said. It's like there's a nest of these things somewhere. I think I may know where they are, I said. Atilio glanced at me in the mirror. I started to explain, but she stopped me. Save it for the XO, she said. The mercs have set up a command centre in the Pear Street multi-storey. We're nearly there. I'll have a couple of them swing you over to HQ, get you out of town. They'll want to talk to you, especially if you have the slightest clue as to what's going on. Take the next right, Roke shouted down. Road ahead's jammed. Use Freeman Street, then cut around the back. Atilio followed his directions, the car turning right and speeding down a narrow street before skidding left through a barrier and into a parking lot. It didn't quite fit through the gap, sparks flying up from the sides and sounding like a finger scraping down a blackboard. Whoops, Atilio said. Glad this ain't my car. Where the hell are these guys anyway? Sitting up top, crying to each other like little babies, most likely, Roke suggested with a snigger. Not this lot, Atilio said, steering the truck carefully up the first ramp. From what I hear, this crew is a bunch of cold-hearted killers, built like outhouses and with surgical enhancements to boot. The car bombed through the empty parking lot, swinging up to the next level. She glanced in the mirror for long enough to see our nervous expressions. Don't worry, these guys can be a foul-mouthed and filthy bunch, but they're usually harmless. We call this lot the Blues Brothers. You'll get that when you see what they all wear. We swung up again, pressed against each other as we swerved around the bend. Don't let them give you any lip, all right? They may be freelance, but right now they answer to my XO, and don't be afraid to remind them of that. Besides, she stopped for long enough to ease the truck up another ramp. Something tells me you'll feel right at home with them, judging by the state of those eyes of yours. We bombed up the last ramp, back into the building. It's the sun. We bombed up the last ramp, back into the blinding sunlight. And by the time her words had sunk in, it was too late. The truck squealed to a halt, and several hulking shapes approached, one of them pulling open my door with a dull throb of laughter. A pair of silver cat's eyes peered into the gloom, a razor-sharp smile slicing open his face. Well, well, just look at what we've got here. Then he grabbed my arm in an iron grip I hoped I'd never feel again, ripping me from the truck into the cold, cruel glare of a dozen grinning black suits. No! I did tell you before, my brain doesn't function in the heat, and it's so hot up here. And I'm so hairy. It's like thermal insulation around my whole head. Okay. PMCs. They'd cuffed me before I even knew what was going on. Cold steel against my wrists, my right arm swollen so much that the clasp almost didn't click shut. I felt a boot connect with my leg, sending me crashing down onto my knees, then the unmistakable metal ring of a gun barrel against my neck, pushing my forehead against the huge front wheel of the truck. That's all it took. A second or two, and they had me again, their smoky laughter rumbling across the roof of the parking lot as if this building too was gripped by an inferno. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" Captain Atilio appeared from behind the hood, one finger pointing at the black suit above me. "Let him go. You've got no authority to..." "It's them!" I heard Z yelling from inside, banging on the tiny window. "Captain, these are the men responsible!" "You shut it too, kid," Atilio snapped. "I want quiet. You, I need your name and rank, and I need to see your commanding officer right now." The truck had seen better days, but I could still make out some of the scene behind me reflected in the hubcap. There were at least half a dozen figures there. I wanted to believe that it was the battered metal that distorted the men, that they weren't really Goliaths of muscle, their silver eyes glowing in the sun, but I knew Furnace's soldiers when I saw them, when I heard them. The only difference between this lot and the guards back in the prison was that some of these wore red armbands over their suit jackets, a white circle and a black motif emblazoned there. I studied the blurred reflection, realising after a moment that it was the Furnace logo. 3 circles joined by a triangle of lines. "We've got all the authority we need," growled the one who'd pinned me to the wheel. He wasn't wearing an armband. "These are escaped convicts, property of Furnace Penitentiary. You want to see paperwork? Then we've got buckets of it over in the tower." I heard the focus of his voice change. "You get him all in cuffs and call Warden Cross. Let him know who's back." Just the sound... I got itchy nose, sorry. Just the sound of the warden's name made my stomach churn, and with it came the nectar, called into action by my pounding heart. A dark flower began to bloom over my vision, reality peeling away like dead skin, exposing nothing but raw nerves beneath. The black suit must have sensed something because the pressure on the back of my head grew stronger. Somewhere behind me I heard the bleep of a radio, a black suit speaking into it too quietly for me to make out his words. "Captain Atilio, please!" Z's voice again. "Don't listen to them. They're responsible for all this. They're the ones who are trying to take over the city. Please, don't leave us here." Another couple of black suits approached, and I heard scuffling from inside the truck, shouts and screams and swear words, all blasted out in one indecipherable chorus. Gradually each voice became clearer as Simon and Z and Lucy were pulled into the daylight, squirming powerlessly against the mammoth fists that held them. The car door slammed shut and I felt somebody grab my legs. I was pulled flat onto my face, more cuffs fastened around my feet, then yanked back and chained to those around my wrists. I fought against it, but even with the rage building inside me, the nectar flowing to my muscles, I couldn't budge my restraints. All I could do was wriggle onto my back, my hands and my feet pinned painfully beneath me as I rested my head against the wheel. At least I could see what was going on now. "Listen, I don't care if these kids are prisoners or civilians," Atilio shouted, marching up to the first black suit and staring him right in the eye, even though her head only came up to his chest. Then she actually prodded him, which made me respect her just about more than anyone else I'd ever met. "You've got no right to throw them about like this. I was going to leave them with you because I thought we had bigger fish to fry, but I'm taking them with me." She turned to the semicircle of black suits that had formed around us. The ones on the outside were all wearing armbands, but those closest to me weren't, pointing in turn to the ones who held my friends. "I'm ordering you to let these kids go." Nobody moved. Just another purr of laughter spilled from a dozen pairs of grinning lips. The sound made me want to puke, flooding my head with memories. The night I was caught, when the black suits shot Toby, the countless times they threatened us in Furnace, and my own soulless laughter when I'd nearly, so very nearly, become one of them. "Captain," I started, wanting to warn her, wanting to tell her to get out of here before it turned nasty. But my words were choked off by a hammer of a fist that slammed into my jaw. Black stars burst into supernovas, plunging the parking lot into a flash of night. That darkness pulsed out of my eyes into my head, the nectar pleading to be given control. Let me loose and we can kill them, it seemed to say, each word knocking a little more of my sanity away. We can kill them all. I shook my head, silently screaming the words away. I couldn't lose myself to it, not again. That's enough, I heard Atilio shout, and by the time my vision had cleared, I noticed she had her pistol out, swinging it back and forth between the black suits. There was a rattle from the truck, and I hoped that Roke was up there. Berserkers might be bulletproof, but black suits wouldn't last long against a cannon loaded with armour-piercing rounds. Kids, just get back inside the truck. Roke, if any one of these creepy PMC mothers so much as puts a finger in the way, then you know what to do. The first black suit, the one who'd cuffed me, turned to the guard who was on the radio, waiting for something. It came a second later, in the form of a nod. "Captain," said the black suit. "Captain," said the black suit, turning back to Atilio, still grinning insanely. "I'm afraid we can't let you do that." There was movement at the back of the parking lot, where a couple of black vans had been parked. The glare of the sun off their chrome trim was too bright to make out exactly what was going on, but I thought I heard a throbbing snarl rise up from inside as two black suits broke free from the pack and walked that way. "Hey, stop right there," Atilio yelled at them. "Don't think I won't shoot you in the back, merc." When they ignored her, she turned back to the first. "You're going to be neck deep in crap when my XO finds out about this. Now I'm going to give you one last chance. Let the kids go. I don't care who they belong to, chump. Right now, they're coming with me." "Oh, it's not about who they belong to," said the black suit, his teeth and eyes glinting. "It's about what they know." "What they know?" Atilio said, and for the first time I saw her gun waver. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Don't you dare," said another guard, this one wearing an armband. He took a step closer, raising a finger towards the black suit who'd have been talking. "You shut your mouth." The first black suit ignored him. At the far end of the parking lot, the two men were wrestling with the van doors, but I knew they weren't responsible for the way the vehicles rocked on their wheels. "It means they're right, Captain," the black suit hissed through his smile. "We are responsible for what's going on. We are taking." Atilio didn't so much as pause. She squeezed the trigger and the black suit stumbled back, his expression one of surprise, his hand held to his chest and the round hole that had been punched through his shirt. She loosed another 2 rounds, one hitting less than a centimetre away from the first, the second catching the suit in the forehead. His head snapped back and he flopped to the ground, twitching. I couldn't keep track of what happened next. It was too quick. Another of the black suits lifted a shotgun and fired, Atilio either rolling out of the way or sent flying by the shot. Simon butted the back of his head into the face of the black suit behind him, bringing his hands around like a club to try to finish him off, but missing and tipping earthwards like a felled tree. Roke opened fire with the cannon, his aim wild, tearing over everybody's head, and all the time I heard him shouting, "Jesus, what are they? What the hell are they?" 4 shapes were bounding across the parking lot, teeth like broken glass, their skinless bodies almost glowing red and blue in the fierce sunlight, and those eyes like 2 silver pennies promising nothing but pain. "Dogs!" I found myself screaming as the warden's pets charged, so much saliva floating from their jaws that they could have been running through surf. My fear suddenly turned to downright panic, and I squirmed against my chains, feeling them cut through my skin as I tugged at the metal. Roke must have recovered his composure, because the trail of fire cut down past 2 black suits and caused the lead dog to flip over in an explosion of blood. But the other 3 were on him in a heartbeat, pouncing over the black suits and me before landing on the truck so fast and so hard that it was shunted over the concrete. He had time for one scream, so utterly desperate that it didn't sound human. Then there was nothing but the horrifying sound of tearing flesh. They'd come after me next, and it was that thought that spurred me on. I gritted my teeth, pulling on my restraints with everything I had. The cuffs were strong, designed for people with my strength, but the chain that linked my arms to my feet obviously wasn't. I could feel it stretch behind my back. Then with a ping, one of the links snapped. I eased my cuffed hands under my feet, then pushed myself up, black veins still pulsing behind my eyes. "Get him!" boomed one of the suits, pointing at me. 2 black suits threw themselves at me, but one flew back before he could make contact. A perfect circle punched into his forehead. I snapped around to see Captain Atilio lying in a puddle of blood beside the truck's hood, her face contorted with pain as she squeezed off the last few rounds from her pistol. She missed the second suit, but she got his attention long enough for me to attack. I squatted down, then launched myself, wrapping my cuffed hands around his neck and pulling him towards me, using my momentum to bring my forehead down on his nose. Crunch! He dropped to the floor, squirming. I couldn't keep my balance, making use of my fall to angle my knee down on his neck. There was an almighty crack. Then he lay still. Atilio was up, even as the rest of the black suits opened fire. She ducked behind the hood and ran to the passenger door, diving inside. I saw her hand pull the radio from its rack. One of the black suits moved to stop her, sliding around the truck so fast he was nothing but a smudge of black against the sun. But he wasn't quick enough. Mayday, mayday, mayday! Under attack by PMCs on Pear Street parking lot. Repeat, PMCs are hostile. Mayday, Atilio's voice fell silent, replaced by radio static. I felt arms on me, a black suit hoisting me up to my feet and adding a punch to the gut for good measure. When my eyes had stopped watering, I saw that Simon had been rounded up too, Z and Lucy held tight by their throats. 2 of the dogs were still feasting on the remains of Roke, their bloodied muzzles rising up every now and again to sniff the air. The third had found its way inside the truck, howling through a wet throat. One last heartbreaking shot echoed from inside the cab, followed by Atilio's final, indecipherable words. Then quiet. The guards that Atilio had shot weren't going anywhere, and neither was the one whose neck I'd snapped. Only one of the drowned black suits was struggling up, and he and the rest were glaring at me, the smiles wiped from their faces. I flashed them a grin, charged by nectar. They should have learned not to underestimate me back in the prison. What now? I said to them. You can't kill me. Your boss needs me alive. Those black suits who weren't wearing armbands broke into the same pulsing laughter. The others looked uneasy, although I had no idea why. I realised that the suit was back on the radio, listening intently to somebody on the other end. I remembered Furness's words, his invitation to the tower. They wouldn't kill me. There was no way, not when their master, their creator, was waiting for me to make my choice, waiting for me to choose which side I was fighting on. At least, that's what I was banking on. Hey, Sawyer, said the suit with the radio. It's for you. He approached, holding the handset out so I could hear the voice on the other end. It scraped through the receiver like gravel, terrifyingly familiar. I warned you, the warden said, the voice like needles in my eyes. I warned you that your betrayal would cost you everything. Look at what you have done. Look at the destruction you have wrought upon your own city. And this is just the start. This is your punishment for ever knowing that you were the one responsible for the end of the world. Yeah, I said, my heartbeat so loud I could hear it in my words. And when I'm lying on the operating table being cut to pieces by your freaks, I'll come to regret the error of my ways. Come on, Cross, I've heard it all before. A burst of static blasted out of the handset, one that might have been a laugh. Oh no, Sawyer. No, the warden said, and even though I couldn't see him, I knew he was wearing that corpse's smile. Dr. Furness may want you alive, but I don't. I've wasted enough time on you. Take one more look at the city, Alex. Take one more look at the world you have created, because it will be your last. The black suit pulled the walkie-talkie away, but not before I heard the warden's final words fizz from the handset. Kill them, he said. Kill them all! How much do I love you all? We'll do one more, because these feel like a natural quartet of chapters. Sorry about Atilio. Atilio was one of my favourite characters. Okay. Changing. I thought they'd taunt me for a while, dangle the inevitability of my death in front of me the way they always did, driven by the sick sense of humour that all black suits possessed. I was wrong. The closest black suit lifted his shotgun, pointed it at my chest, and without so much as a word or a laugh, he pulled the trigger. The world came apart, becoming a blur of sky and concrete and black suits that dissolved into a sickening spiral. I realised I was airborne and for a crazy moment wondered if I'd managed to shed this grotesque body, if that fistful of lead shot had somehow released me from the warden's curse, let my spirit soar free into the sunlight. Then I hit the floor, my flesh wrapping itself around me again, even tighter than before. And this time there was pain, not the itch of the nectar, but real agony that scrubbed the inside of my chest like a cheese grater. I tried to lift my cuffed hands, to feel the wound the shotgun had opened up, but nothing seemed to work. I had no control. I was the pilot of a sinking ship, my body slowly descending into the depths, and there was absolutely nothing I could do about it. I heard another shot, the growl of the dogs, a scream. Was it Z I heard yelling, "No, no, no," over and over again at the top of his voice? Or was it a black suit? I dropped beneath the waves of unconsciousness, the world vanishing for what might have been a second or an hour. I fought it, trying to stay afloat, trying to keep my head above the darkness. The pain in my chest was pounding harder, and by sheer force of will I managed to open my eyes. Sunlight screwed its way in, but past its glare I could see what they'd done to me. My arm, the one that was mutating, had taken the worst of the shot. It had almost been torn clean off, just a knot of elbow bone and a few threads of twisted ligament still connecting it. The limb lay on my chest, concealing another ragged hole that was oozing dirty blood. The impact must have stripped my shackles clean away as well, because they were nowhere to be seen. I cried out silently, my lungs refusing to lend precious air to my fear, my disbelief. Nectar was pouring out of the severed artery in my arm, pooling beneath me, trickling away on the sun-baked concrete. Or was it? I squinted into the light, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The nectar was being pumped out of me, but it wasn't draining away. It looked as if it was forming a black web between the two halves of my arm, as if a spider was hard at work there. The skin of my ruined limb was bulging, swelling out then shrinking, almost like it was breathing. And inside that nectar I saw fragments of fire, red flecks that burned alongside golden ones under the morning sun. "Let the dogs have 'em!" I heard a black suit shout, followed by more screams, and then another voice, surely a black suit, ordering somebody to stop. Stop! An argument was breaking out between the guards, but I couldn't understand the words. I couldn't make sense of what was going on up there. My eyes refusing to focus on anything but my wound. I could barely even remember why I was lying on the floor. It was as if every single resource in my body was being diverted to my arm, the nectar doing its best to patch up a wound that should have been fatal. The web was twisting itself into thicker strands, knotting together as though an invisible pair of hands was manipulating it. The black liquid had covered my entire arm now, from my fingers all the way up past the exposed bone to my shoulder. It looked like it had been burned to a crisp, only the sensation was cooling, like a breeze blowing against my skin. Gradually, incredibly, the pain was lessening, settling back into that infuriating, unscratchable itch I knew so well. I heard a black suit swear, a dark silhouette rising above me, casting the world into shadow. "Go on, finish him off! Don't mess it up this time!" "No! Dr. Furness forbids it! Get away from there! That's an order!" "Screw your orders!" I heard the pump of a shotgun, the acrid smell of gunpowder stinging my nostrils. I blinked twice, the world gradually swimming back into shape and revealing the smoking pit of a shotgun barrel like a black hole in my vision. I was moving before I even knew it, my broken blackened arm sweeping up from my chest and smacking into the weapon just as the guard pulled the trigger. He obviously hadn't been expecting me to move, as the gun clattered out of his hands, the shot carving a hole into the concrete inches from my head and making my ear pop into silence. The suit bent down to reclaim the shotgun, but the same arm, the limb that had almost been severed in two, which should have been nothing but a hunk of meat on the parking lot floor, shot out and grabbed him around the neck. I watched, half in horror and half in fascination, as strands of nectar rose from my fist like scorpion tails, darting forward and puncturing the black suit's throat. He tried to pull away, but the nectar wouldn't let him. The claw fastened in his flesh, lodged there until the colour drained from his eyes, turning them from silver to lead. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't want to know. All I knew was that the strength was filtering back into my body, the nectar's insatiable bloodlust taking over. My arm seemed to have a mind of its own, tossing the corpse of the black suit to one side, raining nectar down onto the floor. I pushed myself to my feet, and this time when I stretched out a leg, the ankle cuffs snapped as if they were made of silk thread. One side of my head was ringing, the other drenched in silence, making me feel even more unbalanced. The world seemed to have slowed down again, the black suits lurching towards me like clumsy puppets, firing off shots that were too far away to do any damage. Somewhere in the confusion, I noticed that Z, Simon and Lucy were on the move, heading for the ramp that led down into the parking lot. And next to them were two black suits locked in battle, fighting each other. Another guard was pulling a dog from the army truck, yelling. Even though I couldn't hear him, I could lip read his words. "Kill him, boy!" But the dog wasn't having any of it, its gaze refusing to meet my eyes, its body hunkered, its tail between its legs. I watched as it turned on the suit, clamping its jaws down on his arm, then retreating across the roof, ears flattened to its head. The other two followed with nervous, backwards glances, and I didn't blame them. I was changing, and fast. My arms seemed to have doubled in size in the seconds since I'd found my feet, hanging from my shoulder like a broken branch. My fingers now reached past my knees, still coated with nectar, marbled with those glowing red galaxies, but somehow being fused together into an obsidian blade. I tried to move them, to separate them, to wiggle them, anything, but they were stuck fast. "No!" I heard myself shout, tearing at my arm with my other hand, the good hand. It would have been better if the mutant limb had been lying on the roof. Better to spend the rest of my life with only one arm than to see myself turning into one of them. A black suit was suddenly in front of me, moving fast. I flinched, but once again my arm knew what to do, the nectar in my system operating it automatically. It twisted back, then thrust forwards like a spear, my fingers slicing into the black suit's stomach. His mouth became an "oh" of surprise, and he looked down to see my arm inside his guts, up to the elbow. He grabbed it, shaking his head in denial. With a grunt of effort, I swung my body around, flicking him away. He slid off my arm, tumbling end over end across the roof and sliding to a halt on his side, sunlight pouring through the ragged hole in his torso. The sight of him there, the knowledge of what I'd done, sat over my thoughts like a weight, a pressure that pushed everything else to one side. I growled, the noise throbbing up my throat, making me smile. "No!" I called out again, but this time it was just in my head, lost beneath the rolling swell of a sea of nectar. I scanned the parking lot, seeing the black suits close in, their eyes full of fear. Now they were all just meat, already dead, even though they didn't know it. None of them could fight me. I was unstoppable. I had set off towards the nearest black suit when I heard the sound of thunder above me. A shadow threw itself over everything, and I teetered around to see a chopper hovering next to the edge of the roof. There was a hiss, like a snake, and 4 missiles slithered out of the launchers, 2 from each side, heading right this way. 3 sailed over my head, and I lashed out at a 4th, ka-dong, managing to swat it away like a fly. It darted off on a tangent, hitting the vans on the other side of the roof and detonating in a fireball the size of a house. The floor shook as the 3 other missiles found a target, a fistful of heat and noise catapulting me over the concrete. Something was cutting through the nectar, and I realised it was fear. The air was on fire, bringing a scalding pain with each breath. In every direction was heat and smoke, and above it all the relentless buzz of the chopper. There was another hiss, 2 more white trails blasting overhead and causing another wave of destruction. The flames around me danced in the shockwave, curling up and splashing down like I was swimming inside a burning ocean. If I didn't move now, I'd be cooked alive. But there was nowhere to go. I panicked, throwing my huge arm over my face. I'd have to run for it, into the flames. I couldn't even keep my eyes open, the force of the heat drying them out, hot enough to make my eyelashes wither. I started running, keeping my eyes closed, my hand up. I bumped into something soft, sending it flying. Then everything went white, a light so fierce it seemed to ring in my ears. My sneakers stuck, melting on the concrete, but I kept running, not breathing, not looking, not feeling, only throwing one foot in front of the other. I struck a wall, momentum flipping me over. Then I was falling. I hit something solid, too soon to be the street below. I risked opening my eyes, seeing that I'd landed on the ramp. Flames had taken hold of my clothes, burning off the smiley face on what was left of my hoodie, and I patted them out as I got to my feet. Above me, through the gap, it looked as if the heavens were burning, and I retreated down the ramp into the glorious darkness of the level below. I hurdled the barrier, down onto the next floor, and again, dropping level by level until the carnage was just a whisper overhead. 8 floors later, and I was back on solid ground, the parking lot's lights now off, and a constant rain of dust drifting from the steel rafters. I slumped against the wall, my body drained, my arm so heavy that it felt as if it had been stuffed full of rocks. It looked like it too, the skin stretched over the expanding muscles, rubbing against sharp ridges that could only be bone. Those weird strands of nectar stood up from my wrist, undulating like sea plants. The limb was a mess, and I wanted nothing more than to find a saw and get rid of it, cut it off before whatever was inside could spread. What had Captain Atilio said about the plague in the city? That it was like a severed artery. You had to stem the flow before it bled out. It was the same inside me. If I didn't stop it now, then it would be too late. I would become one of them. I would become a berserker. Since the moment my arm had begun to grow, I'd suspected as much, but it was the first time I'd admitted it to myself. There was no denying it. The bite wound, the infection, the red-flecked nectar that was somehow spreading inside me. I'd been turned. The knotted limb that hung from my shoulder could have been that of the berserker I'd fought back in the prison, a beetle-black weapon that should have belonged to some nightmare, not to me. I was distracted by the sound of a door opening further down the parking lot. 3 familiar shapes barged from it, checking the shadows before scampering towards the sun-dappled entrance. I lowered myself into a pool of darkness. It was better that they didn't see me. They'd stand a better chance of surviving this if I wasn't with them. But I guess when you've been through so much with somebody, when you've travelled to hell and back, when you've experienced the very worst of the world and laughed together, even though death is just around the corner, then you share a bond with them, some link that can't possibly be there and yet somehow still is. Because just as they were running up the slope, vanishing into the golden blur of day, one of the figures stopped and slowly turned. "Alex?" said Z, his eyes scouring the parking lot, eventually finding me. I pressed myself further back against the damp concrete, but in a flash he was there, bathing me in a smile. Simon appeared next to him, his own grin a lot less even, but welcome all the same. "Come on," Z said, offering me his hand. I didn't accept, and he grabbed me by my new arm, yelping at the heat, but hanging on, Simon helping him. "Glad I'm not the only one who's lopsided now," the bigger boy said. "You're starting to make me look almost normal." Together they helped me up, Simon lumping my arm over his shoulders to help me support the weight. "We need to get out of here," Z said as we shuffled forward, looking like contestants in some weird 3-legged race. Lucy was waiting for us by a pillar, looking at me even more uneasily than she had before. "The army will blow you to pieces the moment they see you, looking like that." We were halfway to the entrance ramp when the stairwell door opened again. This time it was a black suit who stumbled out of it, his clothes charred and ripped, the red armband crumpled around his elbow. He was coughing into his sleeve as he made his way towards the light, so fiercely that he didn't notice us. "Yeah, we'll get out of here," I said, lifting my arm off Simon, glaring at the suit as he struggled up the ramp. "But there's someone I want to have a word with first." Whew, that was intense. I forgot, that was probably one of my favourite sections in the whole series, when they're driving through the city and then they get onto the car park and then they realise that their black suit's up there and Atilio tries to help them. I'd forgotten how cool that was. I know I shouldn't say that about my own books, but that I still remember feeling the heat on my face when I was writing about the missiles firing at the car park roof, and that moment when he goes "dogs" and he sees the dogs bounding towards Roke in the Humvee. Oh, yeah, so I'm glad we did that. Four chapters there. I hope you enjoyed it. That was probably I would say the most action-packed sequence in terms of like pure action in the entire series. How on earth did I get away with it? I don't know. I'm reading this book now and thinking this is so gross. Like, he looked down at my arm inside his guts or whatever that line is. It's just like, that's just so cool. Anyway, it's so hot. You can probably see I'm a bit of a mess. So I'm going to go and get a nice cool drink and have a rest. But yeah, because I feel I need it after that. I hope you enjoyed that. The next chapter, I think it's the next one, maybe the one after that, is another one of my favourites in the whole series. And some of you might remember why. It's really sad, but it's also one of my favourite moments. So we'll get to that tomorrow. But anyway, I hope you have a lovely Friday. And I'll see you tomorrow at the weekend. And yeah, take care. That was like an hour. Crazy. I'll see you all soon. Bye.